State of Cannabis.
This is the State of Cannabis News Digest, a roundup of this week's key developments in the cannabis industry. Our top stories.
Nationally, Washington is driving a new debate over hemp and legality. A federal spending bill includes a strict THC cap that could take many hemp-derived products off shelves nationwide. At the same time, a new education rule clarifies how cannabis-related jobs fit into federal student loan forgiveness. And federal prosecutors in Wyoming say they are returning to firm enforcement of marijuana possession on federal land, even as many states move in a different direction. Several states are responding to those federal changes while working through their own complex reforms. Colorado and Texas are both bracing for the impact of the federal hemp limit, though each state is taking a different approach to local regulation and medical access. Ohio is weighing a bill that would pull intoxicating hemp into the dispensary system and tighten its year-old adult use program. Other states are sharpening their cannabis systems from within. Hawaii and Massachusetts advanced rule changes aimed at product rules, oversight, and patient access. Utah released an audit that questions how well its medical cannabis board reviews licenses. And Rhode Island is narrowing its pool of social equity applicants while setting new caps on low-dose THC products. Meanwhile, Virginia may finally move toward a full retail market after years of stalled efforts, while Florida's latest legalization petition begins another round of legal and political review. Stay with us as we break down each of these stories in detail, state by state, and explain what the latest changes could mean for people who work in the industry, rely on medical programs, or follow these laws closely.
And now here is the deeper look at the key events in the cannabis world this week.
There is a new flashpoint in federal cannabis policy, and it is not about full marijuana legalization. It is about hemp, CBD, and a short clause in a federal spending bill that could shut down much of the sector. When President Donald Trump signed the latest government funding package, it included Section 781, which changes what counts as legal hemp under federal law. The provision bans ingestible hemp products that contain measurable THC, a standard that hemp businesses and trade associations say would wipe out 90 to 95% of what they sell today. That includes many CBD oils, gummies, and capsules that contain only trace amounts of THC. Representative Nancy Mace, a Republican from South Carolina, is leading the push to reverse the change. She is circulating the American Hemp Protection Act of 2025, which would repeal Section 781 before it fully takes effect in about a year. In a statement entered into the congressional record, Mace calls the new restriction a fatal blow for American hemp farmers and small businesses. She warns that it could jeopardize tens of billions of dollars in economic activity and turn out the lights on the legal hemp industry. She also points to the contrast with the 2018 Farm Bill, which Trump signed and which legalized hemp and its derivatives under a specific THC limit. Mace argues that Congress should build on the framework that has developed since 2018, instead of banning hemp products with any measurable THC. She says many companies already restrict sales to adults, avoid child-friendly packaging, label clearly, and pay for lab tests, and they want those practices written into federal law. Hemp groups welcome efforts to repeal Section 781, but say Mace's draft bill would only restore the same gray area that has existed for years. They are pressing for broader legislation that sets national rules on age limits, product categories, testing, labeling, and marketing, and that distinguishes between intoxicating hemp derivatives and non-intoxicating CBD. For farmers, processors, and CBD retailers, the stakes are immediate. A grower in Kentucky, a processor in Colorado, or a CBD shop owner in Ohio may be looking at a law that makes most of their current product line illegal in less than a year. For consumers who use CBD for sleep, anxiety, or pain, store shelves could look very different if Section 781 remains in place. The coming year will show whether Congress chooses repeal, targeted regulation, or a stricter ban that reshapes the hemp and CBD market nationwide.
A separate federal rule is raising questions for people who work near the cannabis industry and rely on public service loan forgiveness. The Trump administration's Department of Education has updated PSLF rules, which cancel remaining federal student loan balances after 10 years of qualifying public service work. The new language says PSLF does not apply to organizations with a substantial illegal purpose. That phrase drew immediate attention because marijuana remains illegal under federal law. In written guidance, the department acknowledges that state laws differ, especially on cannabis. It states that employers will not be penalized if their actions are legal in the state in which they are operating. In practice, that means a state legal cannabis agency or nonprofit does not automatically lose PSLF eligibility just because it deals with marijuana policy. The department still reserves discretion. If the Secretary of Education decides an employer is engaged in illegal activity in one or more states, that organization can lose PSLF status. State legality matters, but it is not the only factor. For most cannabis workers, the immediate impact is limited. Dispensaries and cultivation companies are usually for-profit, and PSLF only covers government agencies and certain nonprofits. Those businesses never qualified for PSLF. A narrower group, such as employees at nonprofit dispensaries in states that require that model, could qualify if their work is legal where they operate. The rule is more relevant for people around the industry. Staff at state cannabis control agencies, for example, who are government employees. The guidance suggests their PSLF eligibility is not automatically threatened just because their jobs involve overseeing marijuana programs. For borrowers, the message is cautious but clear. Working for a government agency or qualifying nonprofit in a state legal cannabis system does not, by itself, disqualify them from PSLF. For workers at for-profit dispensaries and grow operations, the student loan rules remain unchanged.
In Wyoming, federal officials are sending a different kind of signal about cannabis. The U.S. Attorney's Office for the District of Wyoming has announced that simple marijuana possession on federal land will be rigorously prosecuted. U.S. Attorney Darren Smith said his office is committed to using every prosecutorial tool available and reminded the public that marijuana possession remains a federal crime, regardless of state reforms. This follows a move by the Justice Department in September to roll back Biden-era guidance that had reduced federal attention to low-level marijuana cases. Those earlier policies, together with 2 presidential pardon actions in 2022, had pointed away from charging adults for simple possession. Federal law itself, however, never changed. Smith, who took office earlier this year, is treating the policy reset as permission to resume prosecution of even minor possession cases on federal property. That applies to national recreation areas, campgrounds, monuments, and other locations where federal law governs, not state law. For residents and visitors, the takeaway is straightforward. Carrying cannabis on federal land in Wyoming now carries greater legal risk than it did under the previous enforcement posture. Someone who assumes small-scale possession will be ignored may find that is no longer the case once federal officers are involved.
In Colorado, the national hemp debate is landing in a state that already treats intoxicating hemp products carefully. The new federal limits on THC in ingestible hemp products, outlined in the recent spending bill, are far stricter than what most manufacturers in Colorado use today for Delta-8 gummies and THC beverages. Producers in the state say nearly all of their current product lines would fall outside the federal standard once it is fully enforced. Governor Jared Polis has been openly critical of the federal move. He says Washington appears to be reacting to hemp rather than planning for it, and he often highlights hemp's role in supporting rural economies and driving cannabinoid innovation. Colorado's hemp sector had already been shrinking, with acreage down and operators citing tension between state and federal rules. Colorado law does not allow intoxicating hemp products to be sold in-state, but it does permit companies to manufacture them for shipment to other markets. If the federal restrictions take effect as drafted, that outlet may close. Businesses that make hemp extracts, THC beverages, and packaged edibles say workers in extraction labs, drink facilities, and packaging plants could be among the first to feel the impact. Some patients and consumers in Colorado prefer hemp-derived intoxicants, including Delta-8, because they say the effects feel milder than traditional marijuana. Advocates worry that those options could disappear along with the broader category. At the same time, Colorado lawmakers are preparing a bill for 2026 that would loosen rules for one specific product type. The proposal would allow hemp-derived drinks with up to 10 milligrams of THC and permit those beverages to be sold in liquor stores, following models in Minnesota and Illinois. Supporters say that could help restaurants and breweries facing slower alcohol sales and may bring in modest tax revenue. Critics point to reports of accidental ingestion by children and to Delta-8 edibles that look like candy. National groups report rising emergency room visits linked to these products. Colorado now finds itself squeezed between its own cautious retail rules and a federal standard that may effectively shut down much of the state's hemp manufacturing capacity.
Texas is facing its own version of the national hemp clash, while also expanding a tightly controlled medical program. Under the new federal policy described earlier, many hemp-derived gummies, drinks, and vape products that Texans can buy today would no longer qualify as legal once the rule is fully in force. State officials and business owners say that shift could be especially hard on a market that leaned heavily on hemp when broader cannabis reform stalled. Agriculture Commissioner Sid Miller has emerged as a central voice in the debate. He says he still opposes recreational marijuana, but supports medical cannabis for conditions such as PTSD and epilepsy. In his public comments, he has called the federal approach better than Texas's earlier attempt to restrict hemp because it bans synthetic cannabinoids and applies one standard across states. In the same breath, he warns the change could put thousands of small Texas businesses at risk, including many of the state's 8,000 vape and smoke shops. While Congress considers how far to go, Texas is tightening its own rules. Governor Greg Abbott issued an emergency order that sets age limits and other controls on intoxicating cannabinoid products. The Texas Alcoholic Beverage Commission and the Department of State Health Services are now enforcing new safety and labeling standards designed to keep high THC items away from minors and to give retailers a clearer compliance checklist. On a separate track, the state is modestly expanding the compassionate use program. The Department of Public Safety plans to award 12 new dispensary licenses, raising the total from 3 to 15, and is writing rules for satellite pickup locations. Another proposal would allow doctors to recommend medical cannabis for more conditions than are currently listed. As a result, Texans are watching two stories at once: incremental growth in the medical cannabis system and a looming federal squeeze on hemp-derived THC products that many patients and small shops rely on. Over the next year, the question will be which products remain on ordinary retail shelves, which move into stricter medical channels, and which disappear altogether.
As cannabis reform continues to move forward across the country, all eyes are on Texas, and one event is leading the conversation with facts, data, and direction. The Texas Cannabis Policy Conference, presented by the Texas Cannabis Policy Center, returns January 29th through 31st at the Thompson Conference Center on the University of Texas at Austin campus. This year's theme, Maintaining Momentum for Effective Cannabis Policy, brings together lawmakers, medical professionals, researchers, entrepreneurs, and advocates to focus on what's next, from medical access and regulatory integrity to innovation, safety, and civic action. If you believe Texas deserves smart, responsible cannabis policy, this is where the dialogue begins. Registration is open now at texascannabisconference.org. Students attend free with registration. That's texascannabisconference.org, where Texas comes together to shape a responsible cannabis future.
Ohio is weighing Senate Bill 56, a measure that would change both its hemp sector and its young adult-use cannabis market in response to national shifts. The bill is designed in part to align Ohio with the new federal limits on THC in consumable hemp products, which are expected to push most intoxicating hemp items out of ordinary retail channels. Lawmakers in Columbus say they do not want to wait for the full federal rollout. Under SB 56, intoxicating hemp products could only be sold through state-licensed marijuana dispensaries, and other retailers would have 90 days to wind down their inventory. One temporary exception is low-dose THC beverages. The bill would allow 5 mg THC drinks to remain on the market in Ohio until the end of 2026, giving the hemp beverage sector time to adjust or transition into the dispensary system. On the marijuana side, Senate Bill 56 would leave voter-approved legalization in place, but tighten several rules. The measure would reduce allowable THC levels in certain products, ban smoking in most public places, and let landlords prohibit vaping in rental properties. It would also eliminate specific legal protections and make it an offense to possess cannabis purchased outside Ohio's regulated system, even if it was bought legally in neighboring Michigan. The changes come at a time when Ohio's market is already sizable. In the first year of adult use sales, recreational purchases totaled more than $700 million, and combined medical and adult use sales have already passed $3 billion. SB 56 would direct a large share of tax revenue from those sales to municipalities and townships that host dispensaries. Ohio now sits at the intersection of federal hemp policy, a ballot-driven adult use system, and legislative efforts to set tighter boundaries. If Senate Bill 56 passes after the Senate returns on December 9th, hemp retailers, THC drink manufacturers, dispensaries, and consumers will all have to adjust to a new regulatory map as the state moves into 2026.
Rhode Island's promise of an equitable cannabis market is now being tested by the fine print of who qualifies. At its latest meeting, the Cannabis Control Commission reported that out of 94 pre-applicants for the social equity track for adult use retail licenses, only 36 met the criteria. Roughly 62% of applicants were excluded from the reserved pool. Under the 2022 cannabis law, the state can issue 24 new adult use retail licenses, 6 for social equity businesses, 6 for worker-owned cooperatives, and the rest as standard licenses. All will be spread across 6 zones, with up to 4 stores in each. Only those who pass social equity screening can compete for the 6 reserved licenses, but rejected applicants can still enter the general lottery. To qualify, majority owners must come from neighborhoods labeled disproportionately impacted, have certain past drug convictions in their families, hire workers from those areas, show documented economic empowerment work, or meet income limits. The mapped census tracts are in Central Falls, Newport, Pawtucket, Providence, and Woonsocket, and a private firm reviewed the pre-applications. All applications are due by December 29th. Starting January 1st of 2026, a new cannabis office will have 90 days to review them, confirm eligibility, and place applicants into regional lotteries. If the schedule holds, Rhode Island expects to award new retail licenses in May 2026. At the same meeting, commissioners adopted permanent hemp rules that had been in place on an emergency basis. The regulations require lab testing, restrict youth-oriented labeling, and limit sales to adults 21 and older. They set caps of 1 milligram of THC per serving and 5 milligrams per package. Those limits matter because Rhode Island has allowed intoxicating hemp drinks since August 20th, 2024. Many cannabis businesses view them as competition that does not face the same licensing burdens, while parts of the liquor industry support the beverages and want strict control over where they are sold. Lawmakers have ordered a deeper review of intoxicating hemp. The commission will study dosage limits, packaging, licensing, and ways to keep THC drinks away from children, and must report back to the General Assembly by March 1st. Over the next few years, Rhode Island consumers are likely to see new dispensaries spread across the state and clearer potency and age limits on hemp-based drinks. Rather than changing course with a single decision, the state is adjusting equity rules, licensing, and hemp regulations step by step.
Massachusetts, one of the earlier adult use states, is now debating how to tune a market that has already passed $8 billion in sales. The state Senate has approved a reform bill on a 30-7 vote. For consumers, the most visible change is in possession limits. The bill would raise the public possession cap for adults from 1 ounce to 2 ounces, and the at-home limit from 10 ounces to 20 ounces, which sponsors say better matches how people store cannabis when they buy less often. The bill also proposes a major shift in oversight. It would reduce the Cannabis Control Commission from 5 members to 3, with 2 appointed by the governor and 1 by the Attorney General. The Senate plan keeps existing caps on how many retail licenses a company can hold and supports a lower equity threshold for ownership. The House wants a higher threshold to ease licensing bottlenecks, and those differences will shape negotiations. On the medical side, the bill would introduce reciprocity for out-of-state patients and end mandatory vertical integration, which now requires medical operators to control production and retail. That change could allow smaller companies to focus on a single segment of the supply chain. The measure would also bring hemp-derived THC drinks and consumable CBD under cannabis regulation, including taxation and CCC oversight, with added manufacturing and enforcement standards. Equity and local control are woven through the proposal. Regulators would be asked to support employee ownership, standardize host community agreements, and audit ownership structures, lab practices, and out-of-state involvement. Amendments call for studies on supply and demand, tax policy, and hemp-derived cannabinoids, along with annual updates to testing standards. These debates unfold as lawmakers consider off-duty cannabis use for first responders and employment protections for adult users, while opponents of legalization gather signatures for a 2026 repeal measure. Massachusetts now faces 2 paths: incremental reform of a large existing market, or a ballot drive that could roll it back. The final shape of this bill and the fate of the repeal effort will define the Commonwealth's next phase of cannabis policy.
Virginia has allowed adults to possess marijuana and grow a small number of plants at home since 2021, but it still has no legal retail system for adult use sales. That gap has pushed people toward home, grow, the medical system, or unregulated stores and delivery services. That could change over the next 2 years. On December 2nd, the Joint Commission on the Future of Cannabis Sales will release its proposal for a regulated retail market. Delegate Paul Krizek will carry the bill in the House, with Senators Louise Lucas and Aaron Rouse leading it in the Senate. Earlier attempts at retail legislation failed under outgoing Governor Glenn Youngkin, who vetoed every adult-use marketplace bill. In November, Democrat Abigail Spanberger won the governor's race after openly supporting a regulated cannabis market. She has said she will sign the commission's proposal and wants a system with clear product information and tax revenue for education and job training. The draft is expected to include stronger equity provisions and room for small cultivators. One idea would require medical dispensaries to reserve shelf space for micro-enterprise farmers once adult use sales begin. Equity advocates support those steps, but are asking for micro-licenses, delivery and event permits, and limits on the size of large operators. While that debate plays out, the Virginia Cannabis Control Authority is upgrading the medical program. It has launched a new online certification portal for patients and practitioners, designed to make it easier to access documents and manage records, with stronger privacy protections. There is also a federal backdrop. Congress has moved to tighten enforcement on hemp-derived products in a recent spending bill, but lawmakers say those changes do not affect Virginia's adult-use marijuana proposal, which is focused on cannabis rather than hemp. If the General Assembly adopts the retail bill in 2026, regulators would then write detailed rules and license businesses. Lawmakers say adult use sales could begin in fall 2026. For Virginians, that means at least another year of waiting, but with a clearer path than at any point since legalization passed. For small growers and entrepreneurs, it may be the first chance to plan for a regulated market instead of guessing whether one will open at all.
In Florida, the long fight over adult-use marijuana has shifted back to the courts and the ballot process. Smart and Safe Florida is working to place a recreational cannabis amendment on the 2026 ballot. To get there, the campaign must gather enough verified signatures, receive a certification from the Division of Elections, and survive a review by the Florida Supreme Court. Smart and Safe says it passed the initial signature threshold months ago with more than 660,000 verified petitions, but the state did not issue the required certification letter. Without that letter, the petition could not move to the Attorney General, and the process stalled. On October 31st, the campaign asked the Supreme Court to intervene, arguing that the delay was blocking the amendment. Shortly afterward, the Division of Elections issued the missing certification and forwarded the measure to Attorney General James Othmeyer, who then urged the court to dismiss the lawsuit, saying the requested relief had been provided. The timeline now resets. The Attorney General can ask the Supreme Court to review the ballot language. The court has until April 1, 2026, to decide whether the amendment meets the single-subject rule. If approved, and if the campaign collects about 880,000 valid signatures in total, the measure can appear on the 2026 ballot, where it would need 60% of the vote. This comes after a near miss in 2024, when a similar adult use amendment received 56% support but fell short of Florida's high threshold. That effort faced strong opposition from Governor Ron DeSantis, First Lady Casey DeSantis, and other state leaders. A grand jury is reported to be reviewing the administration's role and the finances of a charity linked to that campaign. For patients, businesses, and consumers, the stakes remain high. A successful amendment could open Florida's market to adult use buyers and move more cannabis sales into regulated channels. If it fails again, Florida remains a medical-only state, and advocates will have to rethink their approach.
Hawaii has made another round of adjustments to its medical cannabis program, focusing on how dispensaries operate rather than changing who qualifies. The Office of Medical Cannabis Control and Regulation has amended Chapter 11-850, the rules that govern dispensaries, to match laws that took effect in 2024 and 2025. The revisions cover products, advertising, facility procedures, and the movement of cannabis between sites. Patients will notice that dispensaries can now sell basic accessories, including vaporizers, grinders, storage containers, rolling papers, and cones. Many patients already use these items, and the change keeps those purchases inside the regulated system. The state has clarified rules for oil extracts and inhalable concentrates. These products can remain on sale, but only if they contain no nicotine, tobacco, hemp-derived cannabinoids, or other non-cannabis additives. Officials say this keeps medical cannabis separate from nicotine vaping and hemp products governed by different rules. Waiting rooms still cannot store or display cannabis, but designated caregivers may accompany patients there. Regulators say that matters for patients who need help getting to appointments or understanding medical information. On advertising, dispensaries may not use images of children, celebrities, influencers, or cartoon characters, and may not present products in a way that looks like food or candy. The goal is to keep marketing focused on adults. One key change sits outside the rules themselves. Since September 2025, patients have been allowed to complete medical cannabis certifications via telehealth for both new approvals and renewals. The updated rules keep certification visits out of dispensaries, but patients can now see licensed providers remotely. Behind the scenes, Hawaii has removed a 30-day review period for dispensary-to-dispensary purchases. Operators must file transport manifests before a sale and finalize them within a week. Products ready for retail can move directly to a store. Regulators also clarified the 800-ounce per 30-day sales cap and created a petition process for dispensaries that need to exceed it. Officials describe these changes as fine-tuning, not a reset. Patients may see smoother visits and clearer messaging. Dispensaries face tighter rules on advertising, product movement, and paperwork as Hawaii's medical program matures.
Utah's medical cannabis program is under review after a state audit said its licensing advisory board may not be looking closely enough at applications. The Office of the Legislative Auditor General examined the Cannabis Production Establishment and Pharmacy Licensing Advisory Board and its decisions since 2021. During that period, the board approved 99% of items brought before it and did not deny a single license request. Auditors said this makes the board look largely like a rubber stamp. The board oversees licensing questions for cultivators and pharmacies in a system created after voters approved medical cannabis in 2018. Utah now has 8 cultivators, 16 processors, and 14 pharmacies, serving more than 104,000 registered patients, most of whom use cannabis to manage persistent pain. The audit does not accuse any company of misconduct. Instead, it flags the lack of clear rules for approvals and denials, and warns that decisions may be inconsistent across license holders. Without a structured framework, it is harder for regulators to compare operators or track risk over time. Auditors recommend that lawmakers rethink the board's role and adopt written decision-making criteria. They also call for standardized inspections and for violations to be grouped by severity, so officials can distinguish between minor issues and patterns that call for stronger action. Utah Department of Agriculture and Food Commissioner Kelly Pearson agreed with the findings. He says the state has started standardizing inspections, refining how infractions are classified, and talking with lawmakers about updating statutes so the advisory board can focus on the most important decisions. Patients will not see immediate changes. Pharmacies and producers will continue to operate as they do now. Over time, though, a more formal oversight system could affect how quickly regulators respond to problems, which companies are allowed to expand, and how new applications are judged. For other states, Utah's audit offers a snapshot of a broader trend. As medical cannabis programs grow and patient numbers climb, legislatures are revisiting early, lighter-touch models and adding more structure to supervision and enforcement.
This was the State of Cannabis News Digest, available weekly. You can listen to us on all main podcast platforms. To make sure you don't miss out on the latest updates and in-depth analysis of the cannabis industry, be sure to subscribe to our podcast. By subscribing, you'll get notifications for each new episode, helping you stay informed and ahead in the ever-evolving cannabis market. Join us next Saturday for more insights. Until then, keep thriving and stay green.